This content is brought to you by Uphold, which makes crypto investing easy. I've been a user of Uphold since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. You can buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrencies on Uphold. You can also trade precious metals and equities. They have 10 plus million users, 250 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. As with all exchanges, you can buy and sell on them, but I highly recommend you custody your own crypto. Not your keys, not your coins. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Ron Hammond, who's no stranger to the show. Ron is Director of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association. Ron, happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Good to see you again. How have you been?
Great. Look, I'm excited about the news that took place last week, man. I mean, two major crypto regulations bills got marked up, approved. I mean, there was some tensions on the stablecoin bill, but the government actually came through. Bipartisan support. Ron, can you recap what happened last week?
Yeah, and I love the excitement because that is, the right attitude to have here. There's a lot of excitement here. I've waited 6 years personally for a markup, or they call it a vote, in the committee level on crypto, and not like some small piecemeal bills, but overall major pieces of legislation that some cases might have some legs to go in the Senate if they do pass the full House. So just to recap for folks here, the House Financial Service Committee, as well as the Agriculture Committee, had two different markups or votes, again, in the respective committees. And they've been having hearings on this for 6 months now, in a very aggressive form. I haven't seen this on at my personal level, this engagement in terms of hearings and feedback on legislation. But the two major bills that you're referencing is the stablecoin bill, as well as the market structure bill known as the FIT Act. And what we saw is that we saw the Financial Service Committee have a little more drama than the House Ag Committee, and I'll get that to it in shortly. But overall, I think the major dynamic is that stablecoins kind of fell apart towards the end. Some late night drama from the White House objecting at the last seconds. And the market structure bill, or the FIT Act, got a lot of more Democrats than we thought, and actually passed the Agriculture Committee, again, on voice vote. So there was no opposition technically to that bill. So major improvements. Education comes a long way. But overall, a really good positive week, even with some ups and downs, all things considered with stablecoins.
Yeah, I mean, I was so happy to see that the market structure bill made it through without any hiccups. With the stablecoin bill, there was a walkout. There's a lot of tensions, but after like 13 hours, they were going back and forth. But then you said, even though they got approved in the House, even though they're still fine tuning a few things, the White House blocked it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so for those who aren't in the inside baseball here, and I was in the committee room when all this drama was coming up, but this time last week, we thought the stablecoin bill would likely come to a coalesce around a bipartisan deal between Maxine Waters and Patrick McHenry. Again, just to recap here, Maxine Waters, the lead Democrat, has been a proponent of stablecoin legislation for quite some time. She was anti-big tech getting into finance with the Libra angle. That was her initiative. And then we've seen, with the fall of Terra and other things, that they've started to coalesce together, Republicans and Democrats, on what does a proper stablecoin regulation look like. But there's one holdup, and that's the pathway for state regulators versus federal regulators. Mm-hmm. So take the state like New York, for example, who has the NYDFS, their banking regulator. They have a very robust system in terms of regulating stablecoins. Texas has a similar robust system as well. California is working on passing their own regime. Wyoming and several others have their own state bank regulators in charge of regulating stablecoins in absent of federal legislation. But the Fed, and most notably the White House towards the end, objected and said, look, there should be no pathway for states to have a role here. And even though the legislation had a federal floor in terms of, look, you have to meet these requirements, regardless which state you're in, you have to meet these requirements in order to be a stablecoin issuer. That still wasn't enough. And at the last second, it seems like some rumors are it's Lionel Brainerd at the National Economic Committee. We've also seen, or Council, sorry. We've also seen some other, mid-level staffers at the White House, is what Patrick McHenry said when the cameras were away. So it's unclear exactly what happened. But at the end of the day, we went from having Maxine Waters on board and Patrick McHenry, which are pretty much assumed to have almost zero opposition to the stablecoin bill, right, to then now having only 5 Democrats vote for it. Again, still 5 is really important, even though they're Maxine Waters here. But it shows that this tension, unfortunately, it was the politics that got to the end. And Patrick McHenry decided to move forward with that bill, without matching water support. So it does unfortunately hinder it a little bit, but I've had conversations with staff and members of Congress after the fact, and they seem very gung-ho in trying to resolve this issue before the whole entire House votes on that bill.
So, Ron, you had two bills that made it further than any other crypto bills in the history of this industry. So what happens next? It goes for voting on the floor, at least the market structure, until they figure out the stablecoin stuff?
Correct. Now, it's very, very possible the stablecoin bill stays as is, and they still just have a vote in the general House. I'm sure they'll probably get a decent amount of Democrats as well. But in a split Congress, that's the issue. Is that if you want to work on a piece of legislation that you want signed into law, you got to cut deals. You got to make negotiations. That includes both the market structure bill and the stablecoin bill. And I think Patrick McHenry, especially on market structure, is very determined to move this ball forward. Stablecoins, especially with the Treasury or the White House, does eventually get back on board with that bill. That has a lot easier of a pathway forward too. But the Senate doesn't really pass many House bills these days. It's a Republican House and it's a very Democrat Senate. And so you really need to have the Democrats involved and at least have any shot in the Senate. And right now, it seems like we have some support for both bills, but still not the lead support for some of these members. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But likely what's going to happen is that in the fall, there's going to be a general House floor vote. Every member of the House gets a vote on this, which, again, it's a lot of education. So I've already had some Republicans reach out to me from more the right wing of the caucus saying, the stablecoin bill is just a CBDC bill. And it's like, no, it's not. It's nothing related to that. And having to educate what's on the provisions and stuff like that and the difference between a stablecoin and CBDC. On the left, we'll see, a little more consumer protection concerns and also just the general crypto skeptic concern as well. So it's a lot of work that needs to happen. But it looks like there's going to be at least a pathway forward out of the House. And we'll see what happens in the Senate with everything going on.
Got it. So it looks like August, we're going to have a break. And in the fall, we're going to have a vote, right?
Exactly. And again, unclear exactly when that's going to happen. In the fall, it could be fall or early winter. But I think for sure in 2023, we'll have a general vote on the House floor. And then you can see for yourself which members of Congress are supporting crypto or at least, guardrails for crypto, and which ones say, nah, I think the status quo is fine, which is actually the interesting part, at least in the market structure bill, which again, got more votes than the stablecoin bill from Democrats, which blew everyone's mind in DC. No one expected that to ever happen. We were expecting like 4 or 5. We had 6 Democrats join. Stablecoins were expecting 12 or so Democrats to join. We only got 5. Because of the late night drama. But I think it's really exciting to see at least, hey, look, this got bipartisan support, a decent amount of bipartisan support, not just one Democrat, too, but several, and then moving the ball forward in terms of the general House. I think we'll pick up several more. So, but we'll see that's enough to make the Senate take it up because they need a serious amount of votes in order to say, you know what, we'll take a look at that piece of legislation.
So, Ron, let's say, and I've been talking about this on the podcast, that there seems to be a strong likelihood that these bills make it through the House, right? And then it's the big hurdle of the Senate. But then you also have the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, which sits in the Senate realm. So how does that dynamic work? Is this a bit of like, well, I want my bill to be the standard versus your bill? And are we headed to that?
I call Congress like a high school sometimes. There's a lot of drama that happens behind the scenes, for better or for worse. It's never boring, I'll tell you that. The crypto legislation and drama is always present. There is an ego play sometimes with some members of Congress. And look, I've worked for a member of Congress, and as even as a staffer, had a little bit of ego sometimes going against, well, my bill is better than your bill, even though they're accomplishing the same goals of putting some guardrails around securities laws and making sure the CFTC is involved. Because you'll notice that there's no market structure equivalent in the Senate side, even though there's the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, that's radically, not so radical, but it's very different than the McHenry bill that was passed out. At the same time, we've never seen a Lummis-Gillibrand bill in the House. And so I think that's very curious because at the same time, usually there's like a Senate or House companion. If someone introduces a piece of legislation, someone's going to try to do it in the Senate side to show there's bipartisan, bicameral support. The Token Taxonomy Act, for example, I almost had Senator Cotton and a few other senators very lined up to lead that legislation. But it didn't happen at the last second. There's some other drama as well, but that was years ago. So I just want to just show that case that there's a Lummis-Gillibrand bill, McHenry-Thompson, accomplishing very much of the same goals, but they are very different pieces of legislation. And so the question is, will Lummis and others say, look, we should go forward with the McHenry-Thompson proposal? Or would they say, you know what, McHenry-Thompson is a good proposal, but we'll go with Lummis-Gillibrand instead, and then we'll meet in the middle somehow, some way. A lot's still up in the air. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But I think McHenry's focused on, hey, look, let's just get this passed the House, and then we'll have those conversations when the time comes.
Sure, that absolutely makes sense. Excuse my ignorance. So if a bill is introduced in the Senate, like it's Gillibrand and Lummis, does it have to go anywhere near the House for any type of approval, or it could just go straight to the president?
No, it does involve the House in some way, shape, or
Okay.
form. And legislation they call it as a standalone. So in terms of like one bill itself, like the McHenry Thompson market structure bill, those bills really pass Congress these days. And again, there's 6,000 plus bills introduced every single year. Maybe 100, maybe a little less than that, make it to the president's desk. And so sometimes they attach it to vehicles. Like take the infrastructure bill, for example. They try to attach those things to must pass pieces of legislation. You got to pass the infrastructure bill. You have to pass national defense spending. You have to pass government spending. And these are ways that people try to throw all their priorities in, as we've seen kind of recently with the defense bill. And that's one way to get around you going through procedure and stuff, but you still need to have the buy-in from House leaders and Senate leaders. And so there's a lot of jockeying that goes on back and forth. So it's possible, but the House still needs to weigh in. So if McHenry has fundamental differences or issues with, let's just say, Lummis Gillibrand, if hypothetically that got into a bill, there probably would be some jockeying in terms of, well, let's change this, tweak this, let's come to an agreement. So that remains to be seen. But right now, I think they're focusing on moving their individual bills right now because those must-pass bills, they don't happen too often in terms of every year. It's just like, one time at the end of September, one time at the end of December, and then a few other times here and there.
Ron, hard question for you, my friend. Look, let's say Patrick McHenry's bill makes it through the House, right? Goes to the Senate. And let's say they figure it out. Maybe they merge their bills together, whatever it is. Do you think we can get something done by early 2024 before the crazy election? Do you sense a sense of urgency? Because it seems they're moving fast right now. I was actually surprised by that. What does your gut tell you?
My gut says it's two things. The first is the FTX Cloud has started to go away, and that's taken a lot of time. But a lot of members of Congress were adverse to crypto. Even if they had some inkling of crypto, they knew it. The FTX Cloud hung over everyone's head. And don't get me wrong, in the House votes, FTX came up multiple times in terms of supporting the legislation, why we need to prevent FTX from happening again, to opposing legislation saying this would have made FTX 2.0 happen again. And so FTX still lingers a little bit. But that cloud's gone away. And I think that means it's a little more openness in terms of engaging with crypto. Because some folks in Congress flat out said, I'm not touching crypto. I'm not taking any meetings. I don't want to be associated with this because either I took campaign money or didn't get campaign money. I don't be seen with it. So like that whole cloud is starting to fade. So I think that encourages in terms of collaboration on both sides. On the other end, one thing I will say in terms of issues coming up, it's money laundering and know your customer. We saw that come out with some other crypto bills that got voted on in the House outside market structure and stablecoins, the Warren Davidson Keep Your Coins Act around self-custody. And we saw there's the Tom Emmer's Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which is more around money transmission laws. But money laundering came up several times. And I've had a couple meetings more recently in terms of trying to crack down on the Axie Infinity hack or the Ronin Bridge hack that funded North Korea's nuclear program. Those conversations have been percolating up here in DC. And I think we're going to have a lot more focus on money laundering concerns for the rest of the fall. So that could be the impetus in terms of saying, yeah, actually, we need more guardrails as long as we have some more money laundering or know your customer provisions. So that's one angle or one impetus I can see that encouraging legislation. But I think the fall is definitely going to be the fall of money laundering concerns because those stories really have started to come up to the surface now. And I've had a lot of members on both sides of the aisle say, we have some concerns here. We need to address this.
Yeah, and to your point of the FTX Cloud being pushed away, it seems with the Ripple partial victory, XRP not being security, then BlackRock and all these Wall Streeters are applying for Bitcoin spot ETFs. The narrative has shifted from FTX to the TradFi players getting in. So I can see where folks are more energized now because Larry Fink is making the rounds talking about how great crypto is right now. So
exactly.
Big change in dynamic.
Yeah, and I'll also say, like in terms of narrative shift, we've seen the past 3-4 weeks where Gary Gensler has been losing ground on a lot of fronts, not only in the courts but in Congress as well. Yeah. And I think the market structure vote in particular just shows how much he's lost his own party in terms of buying the narrative that A, the status quo is fine, B, there's no need for legislation, and 3, he's doing a good job on the enforcement end. And we saw that on all 3 arguments from different Democrats fail each time. And I think the fact that there's 6 Democrats who bucked their own party, who bucked the SEC and said, yeah, we're going to advance the market structure bill forward. Even the House Ag Committee said, yeah, we're going to advance this bill forward too without any opposition recorded. That's huge. And I think that just showcases that this in regulation by enforcement is not working on a number of fronts. And Congress is really sending a message back to the SEC saying, we think you guys have really not done a good job here. And we think it's better for a regulatory framework from Congress to decide the future of crypto, not the agency itself.
Yeah, I mean, really great. I'm so happy to see what took place last week. Especially with a good amount of Democrats. Shout out to Richie Torres and a bunch of others. I can't remember all their names, but Richie Torres stood out to me. And I was just so pleasantly surprised by the collaboration and the bipartisan support there.
Yeah, and we should celebrate that. I was talking with Richie Torres outside the committee room after the votes, and my old boss Warren Davidson as well. And there was just an air of optimism. Like, look, we got some really smart members. Jim Himes from Connecticut is a Rhodes Scholar and revered as one of the sharpest members in all of Congress and financial services on the Democrat side. He supported the bill. And he even said, look, I don't believe in crypto that much. I haven't seen anything that's really game changer, but I know this innovation exists. And I'm supporting the market structure bill, not because I believe in crypto, because I believe we need to have rules and regulations in place. And the status quo is not working. When he's on board, that carries a lot of weight. And as Torres said in his Laura Shin podcast, it's a generational issue. And you'll notice on the Democrat side, especially, they were all very much younger, very more open-minded, and they supported the bill for different reasons. But overall, it's a very positive thing. And I think it's definitely worth celebrating. We didn't think we'd get 6 Democrats in market structure, and that's been really exciting to see.
For sure. Now, there were some other members of Congress who sent a letter to Apple regarding their policies on blockchain, NFTs, and so forth. Apple kind of has a bit of a monopoly on app stores. It's not just about a crypto thing from my perspective, but, what are you hearing about that?
Definitely. I mean, there's the Epic Games lawsuit that happened on this front on the Fortnite side, but we've also seen crypto companies either have a hard time getting their apps on the App Store itself or running to various legal barriers or somewhat legal barriers that the Apple community or Apple legal team puts up. So I think folks like Coinbase, Uniswap are probably really happy with this letter. I want to stress this letter came from the Energy and Commerce Committee. We're talking about the Finance Service Committee, the Ag Committee. The Energy and Commerce Committee is kind of more the tech committee. They deal with all things Apple and Web 2 and what have you. But this is a bipartisan letter from the leaders of the subcommittee on innovation. That sends a message that says, look, I mean, Apple's getting hit on a number of fronts, but this definitely sends a message saying, hey, look, you're on the clock right now. We're looking at you. We've heard concerns from the community. So I think it's a very good positive step forward. And I think it's definitely worth highlighting because, again, that committee is going to be taking more of a role over time. We've seen this narrative of crypto really shift more and more in DC, at least, talking about the tech itself, which is perfect. It's exactly what I want to talk about, the innovation in the technology itself. And that's an Energy and Commerce Committee. And that's a bipartisan letter that sends a pretty good warning shot to others in the industry saying, look, crypto's here to stay. We have concerns that you guys are probably blocking them out. And that's not good on our watch.
Yeah, I was surprised by that letter too. And like you mentioned, it was bipartisan. So it's great to see our government is working and trying to get things, trying to get clarity, trying to remove the roadblocks. So, of course, we talked about August is going to be a big break. So is there anything scheduled or we just have to wait till September in the fall?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Congress goes back to their districts in all of August. And that's a way for them to connect with their voters, connect with constituents, listen to, community leaders and others saying, look, what can I bring to DC? It's not, some call it an August recess, but trust me, it's anything but a recess. They're working in a lot of their districts. Right. So actually tomorrow I'll be going to Nebraska, to Lincoln, Nebraska for Mike Flood, who's a member from Nebraska Finance Service Committee for his FinTech flyover. So there'll be 3 Republicans, Warren Davidson, my old boss, and French Hill as well, who did a great job on your podcast, by the way, earlier. Shout out for that. So we're all 3 there, going to bring a lot of folks from San Francisco, New York, DC, Florida, and coming down to the middle of America saying, hey, look, let's talk about crypto regulation, but let's also talk about the wins we just had in the House. So I'm looking forward to that. I'll be there for the couple days there. But I think overall in the DC front, it's going to be pretty quiet for a little bit. But don't worry, when they come back in September, that's when the law of the work starts. And to your point, Tony, you mentioned earlier about trying the rush of getting this done because the election. That's the main reason why McHenry chose to go forward with the stablecoin bill rather than having negotiations over August, because he understands In 2024, everyone's going to talk about Trump, DeSantis, Biden, and Nikki Haley, what have you, Tim Scott. It gets really partisan. My party versus your party, and nothing gets done. Everything grinds to a halt in terms of substance. So, but as we've seen here, this is a very substantive, needs clarity, needs legislation, and a lot of members said, let's put our partisan differences aside. Let's get this out of here. And I can tell you again, after the crypto bills got debated, at least in the Finance Service Committee, they pivoted to ESG, and that got so partisan. It took up hours and hours. Everyone's just trying to get their talking points in. And I'm very happy that crypto has not devolved to that. And that's what I want to highlight to folks. That's why crypto is bipartisan, because if we turn to this partisan mess, then we're like the ESG fight where, one side's trying to get the likes on social media, one side's trying to do the same thing, and nothing of substance gets accomplished. We don't want to become that for crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just happy, man. I there's times when I look at government, I'm like, I get so discouraged and depressed because I'm like, I can't take it anymore. There's too much back and forth, but then they actually get something through. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and again, I want to stress it's substance, it's policy, not politics, and I think that's really important to highlight. So let's take a win. Let's we need some good news, especially here in DC. So I know a lot of us are just recovering from that, but if it wasn't for Monday, I'd probably be having a drink right now to celebrate.
For sure, Ron. Always great stuff, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.